The sun beat down mercilessly on the train platform in Tucson, Arizona, and Penelope Riley thought she might faint from the heat and the fear coursing through her veins as she watched the last trail of dust from Thomas's wagon disappear into the shimmering horizon, taking with it every promise he had ever made to her. She stood there alone, one hand pressed against her swollen belly where their child grew beneath her cotton dress, the other clutching a worn carpetbag that held everything she owned in this world. The platform was nearly empty now that the afternoon train had departed, just a few scattered travelers hurrying toward the shade of the station house. Penelope's legs trembled as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. Thomas had brought her all the way from Missouri with sweet words about marriage and a new life together. But the moment they arrived in this dusty Arizona town, he had changed. His eyes had gone cold when he looked at her belly, and he had muttered something about not being ready for this kind of responsibility before climbing onto his wagon and leaving her standing there like a piece of forgotten luggage. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, streaking down her cheeks as she sank onto a wooden bench. She was 20 years old, unmarried, pregnant, and completely alone in a territory she had never seen before. The money in her pocket would barely cover a week's lodging, and after that, she had no idea what she would do. No respectable establishment would hire a woman in her condition, and she had no family to turn to. Her parents had died of fever 2 winters ago, and she had no siblings, no aunts or uncles who might take pity on her situation. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice startled her, and she looked up to find a tall man standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. His face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and a concerned expression that seemed genuine. He wore the typical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim and a faded blue shirt, with a leather vest that had seen better days. "I'm fine," Penelope lied, quickly wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "Just waiting for someone." The man's eyes flickered to her belly, then to the empty platform around them, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. He did not look judgmental, though, just thoughtful. "I don't mean to pry, miss, but I've been working with cattle for 10 years now, and I can tell when something's not right. That train pulled out 20 minutes ago, and you've been sitting here crying ever since. Doesn't seem like anyone's coming for you." Fresh tears spilled over, and Penelope could not stop them. "Please, just leave me alone. I'll figure something out." Instead of leaving, the man sat down on the bench beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "My name's James Crawford. I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here. It's not much, just me and a couple of hired hands, but it's honest work and honest living." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I saw what happened earlier, saw that man leave you here." Penelope's face burned with shame. "You were watching." "I was loading supplies onto my wagon," James said gently. "Couldn't help but notice. Look, I don't know your situation, and it's none of my business really, but I do know that Tucson in August is no place for a woman in your condition to be sitting alone with nowhere to go. The heat alone could make you sick." "I have money for lodging," Penelope said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'll find work somewhere." James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was firm but kind. "You're coming with me." Penelope's head snapped up. "Excuse me." "To my ranch," James clarified. "I need help with the house. My wife died 3 years ago from pneumonia, and the place has been falling apart ever since. I can't cook worth a damn. The laundry piles up until I run out of clean shirts, and the whole house could use a woman's touch. You need a safe place to stay and honest work, and I need someone who can help me run a household. Seems like it might benefit us both." "You don't even know me," Penelope whispered. "Why would you help me?" James put his hat back on and stood up, offering her his hand. "My mother always taught me that when you see someone in need and you have the means to help, you do it. No questions asked. Besides, I meant what I said about needing help. Running a ranch alone is hard enough without trying to manage a house too. So what do you say? Are you coming with me or not?" Penelope looked up at this stranger who was offering her a lifeline when she had none. She knew she should be cautious, knew that accepting help from a man she did not know could be dangerous, but something in James Crawford's eyes made her want to trust him. There was a steadiness there, a quiet strength that reminded her of her father. And what choice did she really have? She could spend her meager savings on a room at a boarding house and then starve when the money ran out, or she could take a chance on this cowboy's kindness. She placed her hand in his and let him help her to her feet. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come with you." James picked up her carpetbag with one hand and offered her his arm with the other. "My wagon's just over there. It's a bit of a rough ride out to the ranch, but I've got some cushions in the back that should make it more comfortable for you." As they walked across the dusty platform toward a sturdy-looking wagon hitched to two patient horses, Penelope felt the first small stirring of hope she had experienced in days. She did not know what the future held, did not know if she could trust this man or if she was making a terrible mistake, but at least she was not alone anymore. At least someone had seen her in her moment of desperation and decided she was worth helping. The ride to James's ranch took nearly 2 hours, and the Arizona landscape stretched out around them in endless waves of sandy earth and scattered scrub brush. The heat was oppressive, but James had fashioned a sort of canopy over part of the wagon bed, and Penelope was grateful for the shade. He did not press her with questions during the journey, instead pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch. "I've got about 200 head of cattle right now," he explained as the horses plodded steadily along the rutted road. "Started with 50 when I bought the place 5 years ago. My wife Sarah, she was excited about building something together. She had all these plans for the house, wanted to plant a garden and get chickens and maybe even some pigs. We were going to have children, fill up all those empty bedrooms." His voice caught slightly and he cleared his throat. "Anyway, after she died, I just kind of focused on the cattle, let everything else fall by the wayside." "I'm sorry about your wife," Penelope said softly. "That must have been terrible." James nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It was. Still is, some days. But life goes on, you know. That's what Sarah would have wanted. She would have hated seeing me mope around feeling sorry for myself." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, and Penelope found herself studying the man beside her. He had a kind face, she decided, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, or at least used to. His hands on the reins were strong and capable, weathered from years of hard work. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, and she felt her initial wariness beginning to fade. When the ranch finally came into view, Penelope was surprised by how substantial it was. She had been expecting a small shack, but instead she saw a proper 2-story house with a wide front porch, along with a large barn, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals. The house needed paint and some obvious repairs, but the bones of it were good, solid. "This is beautiful," she said, and she meant it. James helped her down from the wagon, and she noticed how careful he was not to jar her or move too quickly. "Let me show you inside. Like I said, it's a mess, but the structure's sound." The interior of the house was indeed a mess, but Penelope could see past the dust and clutter to the home it could be. The main floor had a spacious kitchen with a cast iron stove, a dining area, and a comfortable sitting room with a stone fireplace. The furniture was nice quality, just neglected. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms, all empty except for the master bedroom where James clearly slept. "You can take whichever room you like," James said, setting her carpet bag down in the hallway. "I'll have one of my hands bring up a proper bed tomorrow. For tonight, I can make up a pallet in one of the rooms with some blankets. I know it's not ideal, but it's the best I can offer on short notice." "It's more than generous," Penelope assured him. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford, truly." "Call me James," he said. "And you're welcome, Miss Riley." "Penelope Riley, but you can call me Penelope." Over the next few weeks, Penelope settled into a routine at the ranch. She woke early each morning and prepared breakfast for James and his 2 ranch hands, Miguel and Dutch. Then she would spend the day cleaning, organizing, and gradually bringing order to the chaos of the house. James had been honest about his complete inability to manage domestic matters. She found 6 months' worth of dirty laundry piled in one of the spare bedrooms, and the kitchen had been in such a state that she had spent 3 full days just scrubbing it clean. But as the house began to transform under her care, Penelope felt a sense of purpose she had not experienced since her parents died. She planted herbs in the kitchen garden, mended James's worn shirts, and cooked proper meals that made the men's eyes light up when they came in from working with the cattle. In the evenings, after the others had retired to the bunkhouse, she and James would often sit on the front porch, watching the sun set over the desert and talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he was 26 years old, originally from Texas, and had come to Arizona territory with dreams of building his own cattle empire. She learned that he loved reading, which surprised her, and that he had a small collection of books he treasured. She learned that he had a scar on his left shoulder from being thrown by a horse when he was 17, and that he could play the harmonica but was too embarrassed to do so in front of people. In turn, she told him about her life in Missouri, about her parents and how much she missed them, about her work as a seamstress before Thomas had swept into her life with his promises. She did not tell him much about Thomas himself, and James did not ask, seeming to understand that it was too painful a subject. But she did tell him about the baby, about her fears and her hopes, and he listened with a compassion that made her throat tight with gratitude. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," he said one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Any child would be lucky to have you." "I hope so," Penelope replied, her hand resting on her belly where the baby had started to kick regularly. "I'm terrified I'll do it all wrong." "Everyone feels that way," James assured her. "My mother told me once that the moment you stop worrying about whether you're doing it right is the moment you need to start worrying. The fact that you care so much means you'll figure it out." As September gave way to October and the brutal heat of the Arizona summer began to ease, Penelope realized that something was shifting between her and James. The way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. The way her heart would skip when she heard his boots on the porch at the end of the day. The way they had both started finding excuses to be near each other, to touch hands briefly while passing dishes at dinner, to sit a little closer on the porch in the evenings. She tried to push the feelings away, telling herself she was being foolish. She was 7 months pregnant with another man's child, hardly in a position to be thinking about romance. And besides, James was just being kind. He had offered her a job and a safe place to stay, nothing more. It would be a mistake to read anything deeper into his actions. But then came the night when everything changed. Penelope had been restless all evening, unable to find a comfortable position. Her back ached, and the baby seemed determined to practice kicking her ribs. She had finally given up on sleep around midnight and made her way downstairs to make some tea, thinking the warmth might help her relax. She was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the water to boil when James appeared in the doorway wearing only his trousers and an undershirt, his hair tousled from sleep. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice rough and low. "The baby's active tonight," Penelope explained, one hand pressed against her side where a tiny foot was currently lodged. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I heard you moving around and wanted to make sure you were all right." He crossed to where she stood and, without asking permission, placed his hand gently over hers on her belly. His eyes widened when he felt the movement beneath his palm. "Wow, that's strong." "Tell me about it," Penelope said with a small laugh, but her breath caught when she looked up and found James's face so close to hers. In the lamplight, his eyes were soft and warm, and the expression in them made her pulse quicken. "Penelope," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." Her heart was pounding now. "All right." James took a deep breath, his hand still resting over hers on her belly. "These past 2 months, having you here, it's changed everything. This house feels like a home again. I look forward to coming inside at the end of the day because I know you'll be here. I love the way you hum while you're cooking, and the way you organize my books by author without me even asking, and the way you always save the last bit of coffee for me in the morning even though I know you want it yourself." "James," she whispered, but he shook his head. "Let me finish. I know this is complicated. I know you're carrying another man's child, and I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I don't care. I've been falling in love with you, Penelope Riley, and I need you to know that. I need you to know that when this baby comes, I want to be there. I want to help raise this child as my own. I want to build a life with you, a real life, if you'll have me." Tears were streaming down Penelope's face now, and she pulled her hand out from under his to cup his cheek. "Are you sure? This baby isn't yours. You would be taking on someone else's responsibility." "I'm sure," James said firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I care about you, Penelope. I care about this baby. And I promise you, if you give me a chance, I will spend every day proving to you that you made the right choice." Instead of answering with words, Penelope rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle and sweet and filled with all the emotions she had been trying to suppress for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you. I've been falling in love with you too, James Crawford, and I was so afraid to let myself hope that you might feel the same way." James laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms as carefully as he could manage with her pregnant belly between them. "We're going to need to get married soon," he said. "Before the baby comes. I want everyone to know that this child is mine, that you're mine, that we're a family." They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Tucson. It was a simple ceremony with Miguel and Dutch as witnesses, but Penelope thought it was the most beautiful wedding she could have imagined. James bought her a ring from the general store, a simple gold band that fit perfectly, and when he slipped it onto her finger and promised to love her for the rest of his life, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she was meant to be. The baby came in early November, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Penelope's labor started in the middle of the night, and James rode like lightning to fetch the midwife from town while Miguel stayed with her, looking absolutely terrified. By the time James returned with Mrs. Henderson, a capable woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in Tucson, Penelope's contractions were coming fast and hard. "First babies usually take their time," Mrs. Henderson said as she bustled around setting up her supplies. "But this little one seems to be in a hurry." She was right. Less than 4 hours after her labor started, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. James was holding her hand through it all, and when Mrs. Henderson placed the baby in Penelope's arms, the look on his face was one of pure wonder. "He's perfect," James whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby immediately grasped it, holding on tight. "Look at that grip. He's going to be strong." "What are you going to name him, Mrs. Henderson asked as she cleaned up. Penelope looked at James and they shared a smile. They had discussed this already, lying in bed together and talking about the future. "Daniel," she said. "Daniel Crawford." "That's a fine name," Mrs. Henderson approved. "Now you rest up, Mrs. Crawford. You did good work today." After the midwife left, James climbed into bed beside Penelope, and the three of them lay there together, this brand new family. Daniel was sleeping peacefully, wrapped in a soft blanket that Penelope had stitched herself during her pregnancy. James could not stop looking at him, his eyes full of love and pride. "Thank you," Penelope said softly, "for everything, for finding me at that station, for bringing me here, for loving me." James leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I should be thanking you. You brought life back into this house, into my heart. I love you, Penelope Crawford, you and this little boy, my son." The way he said those last two words with such certainty and joy made Penelope's eyes fill with tears again. "He is your son," she said firmly, "in every way that matters. You're his father, James. You chose him, chose us, and that makes you more of a father than the man who left us ever could have been." Winter passed peacefully at the ranch. James taught Penelope how to ride a horse, though they took it slowly given that she was still recovering from childbirth. Daniel grew rapidly, becoming a chubby, happy baby who seemed to smile at everything. The ranch hands adored him, and it was not uncommon to find Miguel or Dutch rocking him on the porch while Penelope prepared dinner. By the time spring arrived and the desert began to bloom with unexpected color, Penelope could hardly remember the frightened, abandoned woman she had been at the train station. That felt like another lifetime, another person entirely. Now she was confident, happy, and deeply in love with her husband and her life. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching Daniel play with a wooden horse that Dutch had carved for him, James pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This came today," he said, handing it to her. "From a lawyer in Missouri." Penelope's heart sank as she opened it and began to read. It was a formal letter stating that Thomas had died in a bar fight in St. Louis 3 months earlier. His remaining family was settling his estate and had tracked down Penelope through inquiries he had apparently made before his death, trying to find her. The letter stated that she was entitled to nothing, as they had never been married, but the lawyer wanted to inform her of Thomas's death in case she needed the information for legal purposes. She read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope. She felt nothing for Thomas, no grief or anger or regret. That chapter of her life was closed and she had no desire to reopen it. "Are you all right?" James asked, watching her carefully. "I'm fine," Penelope said, and she meant it. "That man was never part of my life, not really. He was just the bridge that led me here to you." She reached over and took James's hand. "Everything that happened, as terrible as it felt at the time, it brought me to you. It gave me Daniel and this life and this home. I wouldn't change any of it." James brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Penelope Crawford, more than words can say." "I love you too," she replied. "Always." As the years passed, the Crawford family grew and prospered. The ranch expanded, and James hired more hands to help manage the increasing number of cattle. Penelope transformed the house into a true home, filled with laughter and love and life. Daniel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, desperate to learn everything about ranching. When he was 3, He got a baby brother named William, who had Penelope's green eyes and James's stubborn chin. 2 years after that came their daughter Rose, who was born during a fierce summer storm and seemed to bring sunshine wherever she went. Penelope sometimes thought about that day at the train station, about how desperate and alone she had felt. She thought about James approaching her with his hat in his hands and his eyes full of concern, telling her she was coming with him. At the time, she had thought he was simply being kind, offering charity to someone in need. But now she understood that it had been the beginning of something much deeper. The first step on a journey that would lead them both to a love neither of them had been looking for, but both of them desperately needed. James proved to be everything he had promised that night in the kitchen, and more. He was a devoted father to Daniel, treating him no differently than he treated William and Rose. He often told people that he had 3 children, and if anyone ever suggested that Daniel was not really his, James would fix them with a steely look and say, "That's my son. I was there the night he was born, and I'll be there for every important moment of his life. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does." Daniel grew up knowing his story. Penelope and James had decided early on that they would never hide the truth from him. When he was old enough to understand, they explained that his biological father had been unable to take responsibility for him, but that James had chosen to be his father, had wanted to be his father, and that was what mattered. Daniel had nodded seriously, and then asked if he could go help his father in the barn, and that had been that. He never questioned his place in the family, never doubted that he was loved completely and unconditionally. One summer evening when Daniel was 10 years old, he and James were mending fence posts while Penelope watched from nearby with William and Rose playing at her feet. Daniel had been quiet for a while, working steadily, when he suddenly looked up at James and said, "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" "Johnny Miller at school said that you're not my real father. He said his pa told him that my real father left before I was born." Daniel's voice was matter of fact, not hurt or angry, just curious. "Is that true?" James put down his tools and knelt so he was eye level with his son. "It's true that the man who helped create you left before you were born. But I'm your real father, Daniel. I've been your father since the day you came into this world. I held you when you were just minutes old. I walked the floor with you when you had colic. I taught you to ride a horse and rope cattle. I'll be the one teaching you to shave and helping you court girls and standing beside you on your wedding day. That makes me your real father. Do you understand?" Daniel thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "I think Johnny's pa is wrong then. You're the most real father there could be." James pulled him into a tight hug, and over Daniel's shoulder his eyes met Penelope's. She was crying, of course, but they were happy tears. This was the life they had built together, the family they had chosen, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined that terrible day at the station. By the time Daniel turned 18, he stood as tall as James and worked alongside him as a full partner in running the ranch. William was 15 and already showing signs that he would be even taller than his father and older brother. Rose at 13 was a force of nature, equally comfortable in the saddle or in the kitchen, with a sharp mind and a quick wit that kept everyone on their toes. James had gray threading through his hair now at 44, and Penelope had laugh lines around her eyes, but their love had only deepened with time. They still sat on the porch most evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still held hands across the dinner table and stole kisses when they thought the children were not looking, much to the kids' amused embarrassment. One day in late autumn, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. Penelope was in the kitchen when she heard the commotion outside and went to investigate. The stranger had dismounted and was talking to James and Daniel by the barn. As Penelope approached, the stranger turned to look at her, and her breath caught. He looked remarkably like Thomas, so much so that she knew immediately who he must be. "Mrs. Crawford," the stranger said politely, removing his hat. "My name is Robert. I believe I'm your son's half-brother. May I speak with you and your family?" James's arm came around Penelope's waist, a protective gesture, but she placed her hand over his and nodded. "Let's go inside." They gathered in the sitting room, the whole family present. Robert explained that he was Thomas's son from a previous relationship, born before Thomas had ever met Penelope. He had only recently learned of Daniel's existence while settling legal matters related to his father's estate. He had no ulterior motives in coming, he assured them. He simply wanted to meet his half-brother and make sure that Daniel knew he existed. Daniel listened quietly to all of this, then looked at Robert with a measured expression. "I appreciate you coming all this way," he said carefully, "but I need you to understand something. The man you're talking about, Thomas, he's nothing to me. He left my mother alone and pregnant at a train station. My father is James Crawford, the man sitting right there. He's the one who raised me and loved me and taught me everything I know. If you want to know me as a person, I'm open to that. But don't come here expecting me to have feelings about a man who meant nothing to me." Robert nodded, and there was respect in his eyes. "I understand. I'm not here to cause trouble or upset your life. I just thought you should know that you have a half-brother out there if you ever want to know him. I run a mercantile in Denver now. I'm married with 2 little girls. I'd like to stay in touch if you're amenable to it, but if not, I'll respect your wishes and leave you in peace." Daniel glanced at James, who gave him an encouraging nod. "All right," Daniel said. "We can exchange letters, get to know each other that way, but I want to be clear that my family is here in this room. Nothing changes that." "Nothing could change that," Penelope said firmly, reaching over to squeeze her son's hand. Robert stayed for dinner that night, and it turned out he was good company with an easy laugh and interesting stories about life in Denver. By the time he left the next morning, promising to write, there was a tentative but genuine connection forming. Daniel seemed thoughtful but not troubled by the encounter, and later that week, he told his parents that while he was glad to have met Robert, it had only confirmed what he already knew. That family was about the people who showed up and stayed, not about biology. The years continued to roll by with their mixture of joy and challenge. Daniel eventually married a sweet-natured schoolteacher named Emma, and they built a house on the far side of the ranch property. William took a job with the railroad, traveling extensively but always coming home for holidays and important occasions. Rose surprised everyone by becoming a teacher herself, opening a small school on the ranch for the children of the hired hands and nearby families. James and Penelope watched their children grow and thrive with a deep satisfaction that came from knowing they had built something lasting. The ranch was successful, but more importantly, it was filled with love. The grandchildren started arriving. First Daniel and Emma's twin daughters, then more over the years as William eventually settled down and Rose married one of the ranch hands. On their 25th wedding anniversary, James took Penelope back to Tucson, to that train station where they had first met. It had been renovated since then, modernized, but the platform was still there. They stood where she had sat crying all those years ago, and James pulled her close. "I saw you sitting right there," he said softly, pointing to the bench. "You looked so lost and scared, and I just knew I couldn't walk away. Something told me that my life was about to change." "Mine certainly did," Penelope said, leaning her head against his shoulder. I was so frightened that day. I thought my life was over. I had no idea it was just beginning." "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "The way things happened. I know it was hard being abandoned like that." Penelope turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Never. Not for one single moment. Yes, what Thomas did was cruel, but it brought me to you. It gave me Daniel. It gave me this beautiful life we've built together. Every difficult moment, every tear I cried, it was all worth it to end up here with you, with our family." James kissed her then, long and tender, not caring who might be watching. "I love you, Penelope Crawford, from that first day to this one and every day after." "I love you too," she replied, "always and forever." They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The house was full of people when they arrived. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for a surprise anniversary party, and the evening was filled with laughter, music, and joy. Daniel made a toast to his parents, thanking them for showing him what true love and commitment looked like. William told embarrassing childhood stories that made everyone laugh until they cried. Rose played the piano while the grandchildren danced around the sitting room, their giggles echoing through the house. As Penelope looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, at the home they had filled with so much happiness, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she had been meant for. This family, this love, this life. The journey had started with heartbreak and fear, but it had led her to a joy deeper than she had ever imagined possible. Late that night, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed, James and Penelope lay together in the darkness of their bedroom. Through the open window, they could hear the familiar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the scrub brush, the creak of the windmill turning steadily. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Penelope asked softly. "When you found me at the station, I said you were coming with me," James replied, his arms tightening around her. "You did, and I'm so glad I listened." She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Best decision I ever made. Best decision we both made," James corrected. "I found you that day, but you saved me too. You brought light back into my life when I thought I'd be living in darkness forever. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to look forward to tomorrow. We saved each other, Penelope." As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms just as they had been every night for 25 years, Penelope thought about the twists and turns that life took, about the unexpected ways that heartbreak could lead to healing, about how the darkest moments could give way to the brightest joys. She had been abandoned at a train station, pregnant and alone and terrified, but that terrible moment had been the catalyst that brought her to James, to this family, to this life of love and meaning. The years continued to pass gently at the Crawford Ranch. James and Penelope grew older together with grace, their love deepening into something comfortable and enduring. They became the heart of an ever-expanding family, the matriarch and patriarch whom everyone turned to for advice, comfort, and wisdom. The ranch prospered under Daniel's management, and when James finally decided to fully retire at 65, he did so knowing that the legacy he had built would continue for generations. On a warm spring morning when James was 70 and Penelope was 64, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch spread out before them, bustling with activity. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren played in the yard. Daniel and Emma's house was visible in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney. Rose's school was in session, and they could hear the faint sound of children reciting their lessons. "We did all right, didn't we?" James said, taking Penelope's hand. "We did better than all right," Penelope replied, squeezing his fingers. "We did something extraordinary. We took a moment of desperation and turned it into something beautiful. James brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture he had performed countless times over their decades together. "I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, every single moment." "So would I," Penelope said. "So would I." As the sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, warming the desert and bathing everything in golden light, James and Penelope Crawford sat together in perfect contentment, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had conquered every obstacle. The frightened pregnant woman and the lonely widowed cowboy who had met by chance on a train platform so many years ago had built something that would outlast them both. A family bound not by blood alone but by choice, by commitment, and by a love that had started with 5 simple words. "You're coming with me." Those words had changed everything, had set in motion a series of events that had transformed 2 broken people into a whole family. And as they sat together in the sunshine, their hands entwined and their hearts forever bound, both James and Penelope knew without doubt that they had found exactly what they had been searching for, even when they had not known they were searching at all. The story of their love would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. A reminder that sometimes the greatest loves begin in the most unexpected ways, and that family is not defined by how it starts, but by how it grows, nurtured by commitment, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. James and Penelope Crawford had proven that love could heal old wounds, that kindness could change lives, and that sometimes a single choice made in a moment of compassion could echo through time, creating ripples that touched countless lives. And it had all begun with a cowboy who saw a woman in need and decided to help, and a woman who was brave enough to accept that help and trust in the possibility of a better future. Together, they had written a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the untamed Arizona desert, where the harsh landscape had taught them both that the most beautiful things often grow in the most unlikely places.